What's the weirdest rabbit hole you've ever fallen into on the internet? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started. Story 1. The Great Glitter Mystery. There is a company in NJ that is the top glitter manufacturer in the world. When being interviewed, they were asked who their biggest client was. They refused to answer, saying they don't want people to know. Cue millions of people speculating on who the biggest glitter client in the world is and why they want to keep it secret. Story 2. I went down the rabbit hole about the Silk Road Marketplace, the illegal black market site on the deep web. I always found it fascinating that one singular dude was able to attribute so much to substances trafficking simply from his laptop. The whole story is so intriguing to me. It's actually one of the reasons I went into my current field, which is cybersecurity. The internet is such a vast and enormous place. The amount of crime that occurs simply from people's computers has always mind-boggled me. Story 3. Going super deep on the history of a family I have no relation to on my ancestry because I couldn't find much about my own family. So I went back to 1600 on the Bennett family, checking church records from 400 years ago. It's John Bennett, blacksmith, lived to be 92 and died in 1647. Answer. I've done this a little when I was working on genealogy for my own family. Start looking into the history of other people, particularly people that towns in my area are named after. Funniest name I found was Tippington, Toppington, Nottingham, for real. Now, I don't know if maybe somebody was putting silly names down on the website, but it looked real. Story 4. The American chestnut blight. What was once the redwood of the East Coast was practically wiped out in the early 20th century due to imports of trees from Asia that contained the blight fungus but were resistant. Today we have the technology to bring back the American chestnut using minor gene modification, I believe, from wheat, but I don't believe federal approval has yet been granted to reintroduce. To me, this is a fascinating bit of science where we have the power to bring back an almost forgotten yet iconic species. I find this an incredibly interesting topic and went down quite the rabbit hole. For anyone interested, info. Answer, true story. I am an attorney representing the United States in cases brought against it. For reasons, I had to go meet with staff at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park HQ, just outside of Gatlinburg, TN. Their HQ building is beautiful, an awesome stone building built during the WPA days of the Depression. I went inside and was in the lobby waiting for the park superintendent when I spotted the walls. All hardwood, 16 out of 8 panels of unblemished, gorgeous American chestnut. I've never seen so much in one place. The superintendent came out to see me running both of my hands on the wall and probably groaning. He laughed. I turned to see him, me totally embarrassed. And as I started to apologize, he waved it away and said, still laughing, "Chestnut will do that to a man." Day doesn't go by I don't touch a wall in here. Story 5. Back in the early 2000s, I stumbled upon a website where the only content was this one man's Walmart receipts. He'd go shopping, then scan and upload his receipts for people to see and comment on. Had done this for a few years by the time I found his website. I spent like 3 days looking at Walmart receipts because after a while, they kind of started to tell a story. The guy got married, had a kid, and I left off around the time the kid was potty trained. It was like a journal written in Walmart receipts. You could follow him through the seasons, whether he had a cold, birthday cards, and gifts for family, and see the growth of his child all through his Walmart purchases. It was fascinating. Story 6. African-American women's hair braiding YouTube videos. I am a bald white guy. The algorithm now keeps pushing all these videos on intricate hair weaves and treatments and braiding. I keep watching, fascinated by how it all works. Answer, this but on TikTok. I'm adopted and my youngest sister is black and I'm white. We got matching cornrows one time when I was 12 and she was 9, but mine was to the point of migraines and I got it taken out where my sister was in no pain. I like the fact that she can have a hairstyle for weeks on end and look great, and she's jealous of the fact that I can wash and just go right out the door, and the fact that I don't spend as much on hair care as she does. Story 7. Wall of text ahead. Someone stole one of my parents' identities and wrote many thousands of dollars in checks out of a joint account, which was at that time my primary account. The individual changed my parents' home address to be in TX, ordered the checks to an address in TX, and forged them to make it look like it was payment for in-home skilled nursing care. Nobody in my family uses such care or has ever lived in TX. We filed police reports, completed affidavits, and jumped through all kind of hoops. Due to the ineptitude of the bank, it took over 6 months to both have the money returned and to shut it all down because the bank kept doing things like refunding money to the compromised account or continuing to allow the individual to update the home address to the one in TX. So when the bank sent a request for a police report affidavit, they sent it to the person, which led to us receiving passing threats by text. Luckily, they don't appear to be credible. They were just mad they couldn't steal our money anymore. The money situation is now resolved, but it has been a long, terrible process where I have spent literally 20 hours on the phone with the bank, 5 in meetings with detectives, 5 filling out paperwork, and my parent has spent conservatively twice that, probably closer to 3x. We have no expectation whatsoever that the police in my state, my parents' state, or TX will actually move forward on this. The fact that it is so many states and a financial crime, and one we have theoretically made whole, makes it vanishingly unlikely. But the thing is, the address on the checks, the names of the individuals signing them, 15 checks to one individual, 2 to another, are completely traceable as people. They are not ghosts. They are not smart. I can't help myself from rabbit-holing in on their lives. They live in the city where the checks were ordered and are linked as friends on social media. I know what elementary schools they went to. I know what grocery store they worked at and for how long. I don't know if they were willing or pressured, but I do know they are not healthcare workers who unknowingly received fraudulent checks. They definitely know this is a crime because they were not licensed to perform the services they are being paid for. It's just a wholly maddening situation. I have zero interest in being a vigilante, but I also know that they're going to get away with having stolen, redacted, thousands of dollars I didn't have to spare, made half a year of me and my family's life incredibly miserable, and I'm having a hard time letting it go. Answer: I used to do a similar kind of investigating at my former job at a SaaS company that makes survey software, which companies use to pay people for filling out surveys about their customer experience. Mystery shopping. Every so often, someone would just start blatantly faking survey responses, which would cost our clients money and cast doubt on the legitimacy of the whole service. So I'd start looking into just how much fraud they'd committed on their fake accounts and typically find the original account they signed up with that contained their actual personal information, sometimes even including their social security number. A few times these people already had criminal records. Sometimes my boss would email them on their original email address to tell them to knock it off. Sometimes they would, but sometimes they'd come back on a different IP with a new fake account. It was so tempting to just show up at their home and tell them to give it a rest. Story 8. The Trials Game Easter Egg Treasure Hunt. There is a series of video games that people are probably at least vaguely familiar with called Trials. It's a game in which you ride a bicycle motorcycle from point A to point B and ride over obstacles, do flips, etc. I've never actually played it, so apologies if it's not a great description. In a nutshell, players found some items' locations in the game that seemed to be related. Someone figured out that it appeared to be a puzzle that spanned multiple versions of the game. The puzzle was wildly complicated, including things like secret websites, real-life locations across the globe, analyzing sound waves from songs, etc. The last step that was established was that someone needed to be in a specific location to receive a package in the year 2100 or something. The guy I was following who kept up on this stopped posting, and completely by random, I saw him post here in askreddit. I messaged him asking what came of the puzzle, and he said life had gotten busy and he hadn't been able to keep up, but last he heard, people had been coordinating to have their kids' grandkids at the location at the specific time. It's one of the crazier things I've heard of and probably won't hear of its resolution in my lifetime. But the rabbit hole is a fun read of seeing how things were uncovered and how in-depth the puzzle is. Edit. Here's a place to check out the journey. Story 9. Oscar Wilde. And this was in the early 80s when no one was interested in studying him, his works, or his life. He was essentially still persona non grata even in university literature courses, and I'm a straight female. I was interested in a British actor who was cast as the lead in a play focused on Wilde. I wanted to know why they would cast him. I was at university at the time and at the library, so I pulled a biography by Frank Harris and started reading it. It read like a gossip rag, which made me suspicious, so I pulled another biography, this one by Hesketh Pearson, and kept reading. I got totally sucked in by the tragedy of his life. His wife and 2 sons' lives were also wrecked, and I really can't tell you why I kept researching them. I wasn't interested in reading Wilde's work, only about his life. A few months later, I moved to Chicago, which had a great many used bookstores on Clark Street that are gone now. I scoured them for every wild biography I could get my hands on. I continued doing this for 20 years, across 3 states, and also during a study abroad semester in London. It didn't matter whether the books were printed in 1905 or in the 80s. They were inexpensive because nobody was interested, really. I have collected over 250 books and other related items about him. Interest in him exploded in 2000 because that was the centenary of his passing. I had also discovered the internet, and at first I was thrilled. People that I could talk about wild with. New books would be published on him. More new stuff to read. In a way, this was the beginning of the end of my interest because I found out Oscar wasn't their focus. Tell me what you think about him, and you will tell me more about yourself than you ever will about him. The academics in the universities claimed him as theirs. Gay men claimed him as theirs. Anyone who wrote about him claimed him as theirs. And Oscar himself got lost in the crowd. I missed Oscar, so I withdrew from the discussion groups and didn't bother buying many of the books that came out. It was all a huge disappointment, except for Stephen Fry. He starred in the one biographical movie that was worth anything. He alone, it seemed to me, understood Oscar and bothered to focus on him. I still have all the stuff I collected. I don't revisit it. It just sits there. And I still stay away from anyone who is a fan or scholar on Wilde. Edited to add, Anonymous has given me an award. Thank you. It's the first one I've ever gotten. I'm going to close my eyes, envision Oscar, and hand it up to him because he deserves it far more than anyone else. Story 10. Sovereign citizens. Between the police body cam footage of traffic stops to their in-court appearances where they try to represent themselves. My sick fascination. A part of it is quite sad because these people have made awful decisions in life, but on the other hand, they're choosing to live within delusion and the consequences are satisfying to see. Answer: I shot an interview with a police officer a while back who talked about the FMOTL types. He said that they tried as hard as possible to point these people into just not doing that, but they would always decide on the worst possible course of action. Like having everyone stand around in the pissing rain while they argue that they weren't driving, they were traveling, and therefore they cannot be done for doing 50 and a 20 limit kind of thing. The TLD debate was that laws are not magic spells, and the intent is the most important thing. And if you get done for something minor and silly, don't try to play word games to get out of it. Story 11. There's a YouTuber by the handle of Thang10146. All he posts are designs for things like gear systems and basic machines made in SolidWorks, but something about them just makes them so entrancing to watch. I'm pretty sure they are just some retired mechanical engineer just keeping himself occupied. Story 12. My roommate threw away some of my vintage silverware rather than wash it. I stored the rest of it away and then turned to the internet to find replacements. In the process, I found out that the manufacturer was the money-making branch of a cult in upstate New York. They believed Jesus had already come back to Earth, that it was possible for them to create heaven on Earth, that eugenics would help create a community of perfect people. They believed in free love, but fudge for pregnancy had to be approved by the cult. To train young men for good pull-out game, they encouraged older women in the community to train them. It might have been the origin of the cougar trend. Oneida makes nice spoons. Story 13. There's that guy on YouTube who can make a knife out of anything, and that's just become my comfort viewing now. Story 14. Late 90s. Someone had a website dedicated to worshiping squirrels. Literal squirrels. Detailed rituals. Altars with photos of squirrels. The works. Story 15. Companies that rip off the old and the crazy by selling overpriced third-rate apocalypse survival crap. There are quite a few. Did that for a couple days, argued with someone about how a battery is not a generator, then moved on with my life. Story 16. Local jail bookings. This started when I found out an ex-coworker who had class like Mary Poppins had a rap sheet. Story 17. One of my favorite books is Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. One of my favorite movies growing up was Flight of Dragons. I randomly fell down a rabbit hole and found out they are super connected. A guy wrote a fictional natural history book called The Flight of Dragons, and he was inspired to write it after reading Wizard of Earthsea because he was so curious how her dragons would maintain flight. Rabbit hole kept going, but I just found such joy in knowing a lot of the things I loved as a child were so connected. Story 18. NSFL circa 2008, there was a trend of knowledge dumps and infographics being posted on 4chan. In one such thread, I came across a paste bin link to a text-only copy of what was allegedly a blog post at some point. It described how the internet child-adult content ecosystem worked before everything moved to dark web. It described everything from production, sale, and logistics of distribution. That alone was absolutely disgusting and disturbing. But it also included a short mention how they used infected personal computers to as redundant file hosting servers. And we're well aware of the lives of those people being ruined upon being inevitably raided, because the police were not competent enough or cared to figure out that the file hosting was a hidden service running on it and not something the user set up themselves. Made me reevaluate how whimsical I was about software security up to that point, and did complete purge and reinstall of my PC on the spot. It's been 16 years, and I still think about that post sometimes. The sheer amount of human tragedy is unbelievable. I genuinely hope it was just a highly detailed and elaborate creepypasta. Story 19. One, I got tucked into a workout forum where two gym bros argue over how many days there are in a week. Story 20. This is back when Facebook was actual people in like 2010, 2012, and not just bots and ads. I was still Facebook friends with some former childhood friends that we have drifted apart long ago, and now they've grown to be associated with scumbags. My favorite Sunday pastime while recovering from a hangover on the couch would be to peruse their very public craziness. One day I saw a nutty status that one of my former scumbag associates commented on, so it appeared on my feed. I decided to dive into his rabbit hole. This dude I never met's profile was dozens of posts, multiple paragraphs long, that he posted rapid fire. It was like the unhinged ravings of a madman, and it was awesome. I spent like 3 hours that afternoon going through them. They included content about aliens, God, demons, government conspiracy, flat earth, crystal orbs, the power of love in the soul, you name it. Finally, I got to the first somewhat sane post that read, I paraphrase, "Going to try ketamine for the first time, wish me luck." I died laughing right then. It was like a 3-hour setup to one of the most amazing unintentional jokes. Answer, this reminds me of a couple of times since I've been on Facebook that I've run into a random someone posting that is legitimately off their rocker. Nuts. Posting the most paranoid shoot you could imagine. And of course, because they're paranoid, they post multiple times a day thinking that there's a big conspiracy against them from the government, etc. I have literally gone down huge rabbit holes, and I actually feel bad for them because they are certifiably nuts. They need to be medicated, and people would post stuff like, you need to go talk to a doctor and get on your meds, blah, blah, blah. I even watched this one lady, and I found her YouTube page, and then that took me down an entirely different rabbit hole. She would drive around town and going to stores and say stuff to people and was very paranoid and thought people were following her, and it was really sad, actually, because, if they did get on medication, that they would be better. Story 21. I found an ad on Kijiji, Canadian Craigslist, selling alpacas. I then spent a good 10 hours researching and came up with a full-on business plan for an alpaca farm that was so detailed that a friend who works in agricultural loans said that I would qualify so long as I had even the smallest amount of collateral. Story 22. Not super weird, but back in the late 90s when the internet was new, I found a website that had every original 80s G.I. Joe action figure. The nostalgia kicked in, and I spent like 3 hours very slowly downloading photos of every action figure I had as a kid. The weird thing was, I was only like 19 and I was looking at figures that were maybe 10, 13 years old. Story 23. The weirdest rabbit hole I've ever fallen into on the internet was reading about conspiracy theories related to ancient aliens and lost civilizations. It was fascinating yet bizarre. Answer, same. I did a ton of research to debunk an anti-vaxxer, which led me to studying flat earthers for an approach to being them back. When you fall into the vortex, it's an echo chamber of not just repeating lies, but also altering the meaning of words to turn lies into truth. Sound politically familiar? It's a bubble with its own rules for reality, and the longer people live in it, the harder it is to come back. Story 24. Oklahoma City obituaries. This was last night when I had insomnia. Clicked on a Reddit account whose last comment was late 2022. The last couple posts were about her being old and ill, possibly it being her last Thanksgiving. She had a lot of comments to read through, a lot of Breaking Bad, animals, and her family. Many little anecdotes painting a picture of who she is or was. A strange daughter in the Navy, and how she's heartbroken she doesn't even know her granddaughter's name. An adult autistic son who relied on her being a stay-at-home mom. Her older husband was in the military, so they had to move a lot, and how he's bad with money. She's wheelchair-bound and attached to an oxygen tank, but she still wanted to get her stories out somehow. She posted frequently on the Oklahoma City subreddit and her age, so I went Googling. None of the obituaries matched up. Who knows if it's my Google skills, lack of online obituaries, or if she's still alive. At some point, I stopped searching and just kept reading through the newly deceased and whatever quirks their family members chose to reveal. All those little old ladies and where they met their husbands. A lady who loved cats despite her allergies. A MAGA supporter guy my age who liked Glee. Don't know how to feel, and what I wanted to find at the end of the rabbit hole. To the random lady on the other side of the world, I hope you're okay. Story 25. Morgellons disease forms and subreddits. It's a condition where people believe fibers, threads, and bugs are emerging from their skin. The majority medical opinion is that this is a mental condition and not a physical one. The forums can get really weird with people uploading microscopic photos of wounds they dug into their own skin to prove the fibers are there. Answer: I work in dermatology. I've had a few people that would send us pictures of the threads bugs at sea they would dig out of their body. Had to explain more than once, "You are tearing out adipose tissue and muscle. Please stop." One woman used a fish hook to dig at her face. There was no skin left on 75 of her face. Others used pliers or whatever random tools they had at their disposal. Another woman was covered head to toe with infected lesions that she would just not leave alone. No matter how many times we dressed her wounds and referred her to wound care, she would take them off as soon as she got home and resume picking. Eventually ended up in the ICU with sepsis, and I believe she passed, as we never heard from her again. Very sad to see, because they get mad frustrated when you explain they need psychiatric help to manage it. We can heal the skin, but only if they curb the actual behaviors. Story 26. Somehow went from cute cat videos to carpet cleaning, dryer vent cleaning, overgrown lawn property trims, and ended up on cake decorating. I enjoyed all of them. Story 27. Afghanistan. Not weird in the literal sense, but more so how deeply invested in was regarding their history, the tribes, the violent uprisings, all of it. The TLDR is that they're a culture of warriors. For instance, one of their tribes, the Hazara, are descendants of Genghis Khan. Kind of helps give their history some context, as they're mainly tribes of fighters. The oddest part of it all is what set me down the rabbit hole. A random painting found in the dumpster. I'm not into art, but this one did something to me. Story 28. There's a whole set of YouTube shorts where former NBA stars talk about Larry Bird. I've watched probably hundreds of these shorts. I don't like basketball. Ooh, also The Undertaker apparently has a podcast and makes YouTube shorts. I've watched a ton of his content too, but I've never been interested in professional wrestling. I guess I have a type. Answer: Larry Bird is such an interesting character. He's one of the greatest trash talkers in the history of the NBA, was the main player on one of the greatest dynasties in the league, had the greatest rivalry ever, and had one of the most unique reasons for retiring. He's also one of only a few people who has been successful at all three levels of the league: player, coach, and general manager. I can understand why people talking about him would be interesting. Story 29. There was an Ask Reddit about glory hole experiences about a year or so ago. Knowing nothing about them, except what they are, or the people who frequent them, it actually was a pretty fascinating rabbit hole. Story 30. The engineering aspect of building nuclear weapons. There is probably no more useless topic to be informed about. The information is questionable and unverifiable. There is no real-world application, and it's a complex and difficult to understand topic. I strongly recommend anyone starting down this road to Google Bardcore instead and spend time in a comparatively productive manner. Story 31. This was like 18 years ago, so I don't recall all the details of how I got from A to 42, but I was pregnant and I worked for a podiatry office. I worked with a lot of cleaning and sanitizing products, getting rooms ready in between patients, and was worried some could be harmful to me. I started out looking up hazardous chemicals one shouldn't inhale or touch while pregnant, and of course each word was completely foreign to me, so I had to look them up individually to see what products they were used in. I came across one word, and it led me down an absolute rabbit hole because, and yes, fuzzy on all the details, it was used in production of certain things. Okay, production of what? Further down the rabbit hole, I found out this hazardous chemical was used in the making of Splenda. My ADHD brain was like, new rabbit hole. So I read up more on Splenda and found out the body can't actually break it down and it comes out in your stool. Furthermore, it can't even be broken down after that and, much like microplastics, can be found in waterways. Story 32. Ended up on a 2-day YouTube rabbit hole about caving and cave diving disasters. Prompted me to write a short story inspired by it. Story 33. Someone of the community Facebook groups mentioned how my town passed the ordinance that allows you to have backyard chickens. So I started looking at chickens to see if it might be fun to have pets. That turned to finding out there are businesses that will let you rent a chicken coop and chickens. So I went to search how many chickens you could keep in your backyard, and turns out the ordinance says 6 chickens, ducks, or 2 pygmy goats. So that started me looking at goats and what they are like to keep as pets. I was seriously considering how to fence in the yard so we could have goats before my husband talked me down. Story 34. During the 2012 Mayan calendar issue, I wanted to look and see why people believed in this thing. That has sent me down a deep and complicated New Age rabbit hole that I'm still in. Story 35. My wife once told me about this particular subset of Brazilian women who dedicate their lives to their SOs in prison. They spend all week making gigantic Tupperware buckets of food, buying snacks and supplies, i.e. toothpaste and deodorant, etc., then will meet up with other women and take the bus, often hours away, down to the prison to visit their partners, give them their snacks, have conjugal visits and whatever. They have to dress a certain way and bring everything in clear plastic duffel bags. It's a whole culture, and even have businesses dedicated to selling the clear bags in specific clothes. I spent hours on TikTok watching these guys putting together their SO's jumbo for that week. It's a whole culture, and it is fascinating. They call themselves cunhadas or something, sisters-in-law. Story 36. I was reading an article about Jimmy Carter and his many contributions to Habitat for Humanity. I had never heard of the guinea worm before that. Story 37. Folks on YouTube who mow lawns, use monster brush and shrubbery trimmers, plant substance whackers, power washers, and sidewalk edgers, and clear up lots of abandoned homes or fur-disabled folks for free. Story 38. At work, a client said they were working on a new urinary catheter and wanted me to come up to speed on this subject. My research on the work computer was blocked by IT settings, so I did the research at home. Little did I know that there is a kink for using urinary catheters to fill a person's bladder from outside the body so that they feel the need to pee. Story 39. Am ashamed of it, but 90 Days Fiancé, especially that one couple who FaceTimed each other, literally 24/7, and the girl was weirdly jealous of every single woman in that boy's life, even his dentist, and also that one couple where this American woman marries this Indian dude, and his family dislike her because she can't make Indian food or cover herself up in front of the fiel. Story 40. Tsunami videos on YouTube from the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami and the 2011 Japanese tsunami. Absolutely mesmerizing because it just doesn't seem real. Story 41. Started on Wikipedia trying to find the name of the actress that played Lois Lane in the old TV series, Phyllis Coates BTW, and just by following links ended up with a story about a PR0N star living in the tunnels of Las Vegas, Jenny Lee. Midway through this was a takedown kidnapping story and a cocaine condo money laundering just to make it even more weird. Superman, takedown kidnapping. Former PR0N star living in tunnels. That's enough internet for one day. Story 42. Ants Canada, where the narrator can make you feel sad for the loss of his fire ant colony, nicknamed the Fire Nation. Story 43. The Kaneka Jenkins story. I must have watched so many video footage on repeat and slow-mo just for there to still be no answer or no person held responsible. I still don't think she wandered in there alone, and there was a crazy rumor that they stole her organs, and Selena Gomez received a kidney because she happened to be in town for a kidney transplant. Answer: I haven't heard of this until I saw your comment. I just read the Wikipedia page. It does seem weird. She had traces of a prescription substances not prescribed to her in her system that when mixed with adult beverage hastens the effects of hypothermia, and she was found in a freezer that happened to not be in use at the time. That seems way too suspicious to be a coincidence. Story 44. Jim Jack 336 mystery. I used to not be a fan of mysteries, especially online mysteries as a whole, until I stumbled upon the Jim Jack 336 mystery on the internet some time ago. Basically, I'll try to keep it short. A very old sim racing community, not iRacing, had a well-known community modded that helped members of the community set up groups or teams to make mods with, and he randomly disappeared one day. However, this wasn't well known back then in the community, as it was really only known upon the models themselves. Jim Jack 336 did have a Reddit account, of the same name of course, that went inactive randomly around the same time. Years later, a lot of people discovered that a few of the sim racing community modding groups were actually set up and managed or controlled by this Jim Jack 336 guy. Then people discovered that some modding group websites had the name of Jim Jack 336 in the HTML code and the name of a company called Full Throttle Ltd. Look it up on ICIJ. People then searched the company and found out it was a foreign shell company located in the British Virgin Islands. Some really smart people discovered that the intermediary of the shell company was an infamous offshore intermediary firm called Mossack Fonseca. There are many documentaries on YouTube about controversies of this firm and its dealings with private ultra-wealthy people, especially financial crimes. People became suspicious that some possibly wealthy man who had a Reddit account named Jim Jack 336 was using these modding groups to shield his shell companies from possibly shady businesses, and this sim racing community was just a front cover to all of it. Story 45. The lock-picking lawyer is the best lockpicker you will ever come across. What you learn after many hours of watching him pick locks each in a minute or less, master is a garbage company. Story 46. Reading old grimoires. Books of ritual magic. The older the better. I don't believe magic exists, and they read a lot like fan fiction, but it was fun. Story 47. I saw a guy on TV who injected saline into his forehead to make a giant bagel shape. I Googled saline injections and found an entire forum of guys who inject saline into their balls to make them look bigger. Story 48. I still wonder. Back in 2019, Hurricane Dorian hit the Abocos Islands in the Bahamas. There were thousands of Haitians living in a slum called the Mud at the end of the island. The slum was wiped off the map and supposedly the 3K or so Haitians. I have never found any answers about Haitians or bodies. Story 49. The sinking of the Titanic was actually an insurance fraud gone wrong. But just like with most conspiracy theories, it's way too convoluted and someone involved would have admitted to it. Story 50. I do not like Beyonce, but I saw a TikTok of Beyonce doing the mute challenge and liked it because it looked kind of cool. And I swear every third video I scrolled was a Beyonce video. Story 51. Reading about all the mostly women who are addicted to eating talcum powder. It would be almost unbelievable if it weren't true. Story 52. The Denver airport conspiracy. Gargoyles, lizard people, Illuminati, art with dead babies. There is something for everyone. Story 53. Way back in the 90s, there was a site called Useless Web Pages. It gave links to thousands of web pages that really had no wide appeal, or indeed any appeal, such as random collections of CDs or doll heads, finding your birthday in pie, a catalog of the films of Ron Jeremy, fake user counters, etc. I spent hours looking them up and either shaking my head or chortling madly. Story 54. I remember getting very lost in a Paul McCartney is dead and was replaced by a winner in a Paul McCartney lookalike competition, rabbit hole, when you had to go to the library to use the internet. It's still one of my favorite conspiracy theories. Story 55. Kathy Bates' grandfather, believing John Wilkes Booth didn't die and he met him running a general store, but apparently didn't believe him then. Eventually said man died and no one claimed his body, so he was a boardwalk attraction. Until the grandfather got a hold of it and tried to sell it to Henry Ford. The body went from carnival to carnival and eventually in someone's apartment, then I want to say disappeared. Edit. He wrote a book about it. Story 56. Zits. I watched so many, then all of a sudden a how to wax a man's privates came up. I watched the in-depth video and fully confident I could wax a man in an emergency waxing situation. Story 57. YouTube videos around group stalking. People convinced the entire neighborhood was in on their surveillance. Actually, some weird videos that were hard to say were just coincidence. Story 58. The English royal family. I'm trying to figure out why they are still relevant. Most European nations still have a monarch, but they seem so normal, like they're just doing a 9 to 5. The English seem to treat it as if it's still 300 years ago. As an American, it is easier to learn about past monarchs than it is to learn about American presidents. The sad part is I don't like them like that, and I feel they have little to no accountability. It's mind-blowing. Story 59. Couldn't sleep one night, started looking up where random celebrities are from, something I don't really care about unless they're going vocal about it, so I thought it'd help me fall asleep. And I ended up reading about Nunavut somehow for hours. I had never even heard of Nunavut. I love talking about it now, like a decade later, lol. Story 60. Barbershop, quartet, competitions. Fell into that I was still on substances, so I was spending like 12 hours a day just nodding off watching these things in full one after another. It's super fascinating. Story 61. One I never intended to go down was the Boston bombings. They are weirdly connected to a mysterious triple takedown in MA in a Chechen MMA fighter who was eliminated by FBI agents. Pretty crazy. Was a solid 3 hours I don't regret. Story 62. I've never told anybody this before, like anybody. In 2014, during a depressive episode, I spent 87 on Candy Crush. Story 63. I saw a post that was being shared on Facebook that was saying, our country is turning away from God because Washington is now facing away from In God We Trust on the quarter. Went down a deep rabbit hole about the history of the quarter design and all of the versions that exist. Story 64. Dominoes. There's a whole culture of people who build enormous structures out of tens of thousands of dominoes and knock them down. Check out Lily Havesh. Story 65. Unsolved crimes could spend days reading, especially Inez, where seems to be police cover-ups for one reason or another. Story 66. Child Immortality Project. It was a ton of websites made by a guy, or possibly a bot, in the early 2000s. It used lots of images of spiders and satellite maps. The sites basically argue that passing only exists because we allow it to be legal, and that the president at any time could say no one else dies and we become immortal. It was clearly the product of a schizophrenic or someone with some horrible mental issues. There were supposedly thousands of these websites at one point, which is why people thought he might have some type of algorithm making them. Story 67. Time Cube. Until you can tear and burn the marshmallow to escape the evil one, it will be impossible for your educated, brilliant brain to know that 4 different corner harmonic 24-hour days rotate simultaneously within a single 4-quadrant rotation of a squared equator in cubed Earth. Story 68. Operation Legacy. The British government's, apparently successful, ongoing operation to hide all the atrocities Britain has committed over the centuries. They were still operating concentration camps, a concept they invented, in Africa up to the 1960s. I got into it after talking to several Brits about the Irish potato famine. They learn in school that the government sent food aid and set up various support schemes to help out. That's where their education about it stops. They don't learn that those schemes were stopped after a few months and the government switched priorities to exporting food. From Ireland for the rest of the famine years. The famine went on for 7 years. After that, I looked at what they did in India and all over Africa. British people have no idea. All of it done in their name. This isn't history. The last government passed legislation to cover up what the army and security services did in Northern Ireland. The current government is under pressure from the ICC and UN and families of victims to reverse it. I'm not saying what they did was either wrong or right, but they're covering it up, so... Story 69. I used to research the evil shoot common companies do in the US and overseas. Nestle is one most people are aware of nowadays, but they also own several other water mining companies disguised as local brands. I heard of one nearby shoot deal and found the water rights were handed over for a measly few $1,000 bribe. Nestle said they'd even dig us another water source so we'd be all set. They did dig another well, but it was shoddy work and dried up almost immediately, leading to major drought in the area that persists to this day. Little corporate bait and switch. I guess it's not that weird, but I still find it weird companies can do evil shoot like this and never face anything more than a fine. They know they have the resources to say and do anything they like. Story 70. I fell down a giant rabbit hole and wound up debunking the 25-year-old animation conspiracy that claimed the Lion King was a ripoff of Kimba the White Lion. Story 71. Rug cleaning. Barn find cars, not the restoration of them, just the digging them out of where they are stored and brought out into the light. Story 72. That Portugal is actually East Europe. The amount of cultural similarities between Portugal and Eastern Bloc countries is wild. Are Portugal Sicabliat? Story 73. I randomly stumbled on a blog that was all about the old school 80s and 90s Nazi punk scene by a fan and someone deep in the scene, totally nostalgia focused, because it was more of a, oh, look how young we all were, kind of blog with home pictures of bands in the fans and skinheads at parties. It was pretty interesting. I forgot the site, but it was something like Blood and Honor in the name. I dislike Nazis like anyone else, but also am fascinated by them, and getting to see their own spaces through the years was a total rabbit hole. Story 74. LeninMurderTruth.com. It's a guy rambling on about how Stephen King apparently take down Lenin and used Chapman as a scapegoat. He's been seen driving a van around promoting his theory and website as far back as the early 2000s. He still updates his website to this day, wrote his own booklet about it and everything. Eat it, working link. Story 75. I needed information on pollination of a number of food-producing tree species for a novel I'm working on, and ended up discovering that avocado trees are quite weird in that their flowers are male for half of the day and female for the other half. Some cultivars' flowers are male in the morning and female in the afternoon, some the opposite, in about 2 to 2:30 p.m. You can usually get enough overlap that there are some of each on the tree. Different cultivars also flower and fruit at different times of the year, so there's a surprising amount of logistics involved if you want a novel in which a subsistence-level agrarian village has reasonably steady access to avocados. If you would like 2 avocado trees that flower and fruit near the same time and are on opposite male-female schedules so that they can pollinate each other, I recommend 1 bacon and 1 Haas. Story 76. I have spent hours on YT to watch some guy eating Army MRE packs from different countries. Very addicting. Story 77. Underground Facebook. So I have an ex from a little before the pandemic who has a degree in computer science, and she is the most resourceful, let's say, programmer I've known. I was unaware of her talents at first, and I bailed after seeing her casually doing things that not a lot of people know how to do, plus she's a demon. She showed me underground Facebook one day. I was blown away. It's Facebook, but you have to know how to type the names of the accounts to get there, and they use multiple keyboards to avoid the watchful eyes. Like, this was disturbing. There were accounts, like, for example, named like this, 00M3. There is some really suspicious stuff there. I think there is probably human trafficking going on, you name it. Like, you might come across a raw-made advertising post and see a picture of a living room and a female minor sitting down on the sofa in the background. This was about 7 years ago. We live in a scary world, my friends. I feel uncomfortable knowing how many monsters live among us AMs casually stuff out in the open. Story 78. Back in the days of LiveJournal, I happened upon the world of proanemia, and I could not believe that these people were for real. Then to see documentaries and news stories about it several years later was even weirder. Story 79. I started watching old episodes of To Catch a Predator a few years ago on YouTube. That led me down the Lorne Armstrong rabbit hole. Lorne was one of the predators caught on the show, and fans of the show have been catfishing him ever since he got out of prison. Those of us who keep up with the Lorne saga are called Lorneographers, and we belong to the Church of Cod. Story 80. Not me, but my husband. We had quit cigarettes for 2 weeks and should have been on the upswing. First week is the worst. We hung out with friends and smoked plant substance with them. It was a pre-roll. The next day, we felt like we were reset back to day one of quitting cigarettes. My husband went down a rabbit hole and found that companies are now adding chemicals to pre-roll joints and rolling papers that are also found in cigarettes and make them addictive. These chemicals are also being added to sugary foods in adult beverage. Story 81. I started wondering if it's possible to be a bounty hunter, just digging around on the web. Found a list of open bounties and started researching these people. Managed to track down one guy, but he was a young kid who had failed to appear on a minor possession charge. Wouldn't have felt good about turning him in. Story 82. Whenever I watch a movie or TV show, I love reading up about the cast, except that my fascination doesn't stop once the movie ends. Instead, I pick 1 or 2 cast members that I found particularly interesting and find out everything that the internet could possibly tell me about them. I'm talking about details about their past relationships, scandals, brand deals, etc. This happens to the point where I bring these fun facts up randomly in conversations. And then, when I watch another movie or TV show, it starts all over again. My current obsession is Simon Baker from The Mentalist. Story 83. Chumbawamba on YouTube. They're way more than just the one hit they have that we all know. They have songs about being at it on Facebook and about torturing James Hetfield. More of a joke than a mean-spirited sentiment. Definitely check out the live stuff. It shows how talented and ridiculous they are. Story 84. Once a friend told me to look up videos of squid intimacy on YouTube because it looks cool, so I found a video called The Octopus View of Human Intimacy Excitation instead. I discovered an entire world of weird videos by this guy under the name Happy Theory about human anatomy. It's like a very complicated delusional theory of how the human body works based on odd metaphysical ideas and has something to do with Tai Chi. He's very fixated on self-care, the male body part, and homosexuality. He speaks in a dead serious monotone voice that makes it so much funnier. He has hundreds of videos. My favorite, It's Self-Care Will Make You a Trapezoid. Look it up. You will not be disappointed. Story 85. Cicada 3301. Spoilers. Pretty much a random group of unknown people were looking for geniuses to join their group of hackers or whatever. They made claims of being responsible for leaking some big things and being able to pull strings behind the scenes and so on. They made a ton of ciphers and puzzles spanning over years, and some were actually physically hidden IRL. They became increasingly more and more difficult. Some of them were insanely hard to crack. Even knowing the answer to some of them, it still blows my mind how people were able to figure it out. Some are still unsolved to this day. They're a 60-ish page book filled with hidden messages and clues, but no real answer to what or why it exists. Either way, only people that were able to solve all of them solo were selected to continue, and the puzzle stopped being made public. So there was unique tests and stuff for each individual that made it that far. This acted as a screening process because they literally only wanted the best of the best. So it came down to just a few people that ended up finishing the multi-year test. Turns out the entire thing was more or less a recruitment to a small group of people who would just chat and weren't actually doing anything. Some of the people that actually got in leaked the ciphers and puzzle solutions to get in after they had left. And even though it was a giant nothing burger, it's insane how hard some of them were to solve, and it blow my mind how smart people are to even create the cipher, let alone solve it, all for nothing, lol. Story 86. For St. Meghan Markle, these people are completely unhinged in their absolute primal visceral hatred. Or Travis and Taylor, same as above, absolutely unglued, detached from reality, absurd beyond comprehension, loathing. Story 87. I remember when I discovered How to Basic on YT. I stopped everything I was doing for like 3 days and just binged every single video. Story 88. For Gangs Talking and Others. You always hear about the stories about people who think the government is watching them, often mentally ill. Our Gangs Talking lets you watch their mental illnesses develop and mature in real time. Story 89. I worked for a D2D agency, Defense Contract Management Agency, or DCMA. When we first got the internet at work, I searched for DCMA. I don't think we even had Google at that time. It didn't find an agency of the US government, but it did find the Dutch Country Music Association. Not exactly a wormhole, but humorous. Story 90. 9/11, more specifically how the CIA released an image of a handwritten letter talking about what would occur on 9/11/21, although the date on the letter, I believe, was June of 2000. I saw the image in 2019. I recently went back into the archives to search for it, but was unsuccessful in finding it. I believe they took it down, which points to question 1. Story 91. Cookie Run. The game has been on my radar on and off for 5 years, but I didn't dove into the rabbit hole until a couple of years after Kingdom. 2 weeks later, and I'm one of those people who makes fanfics of my favorite characters. Story 92. The 1955 Le Mans disaster. It started out with watching a short documentary online years ago and went deep to the point where I've probably seen every single one ever made, read every article and book on it, and have researched each and every car and driver involved. It was fun. Story 93. A group on YouTube that try to get a sixth sense of magnetism and showing how to put little magnet in their finger using scalpel and cutting and aligning the magnet in Cindy, saying gold-plated was better or so something I don't remember and let it that way. Story 94. Diana House got sucked into the story completely. Then it turned out to be a viral marketing campaign for a movie that was never made. IIRC. Story 95. The Ingalls family of Laura Ingalls Wilder, her daughter Rose Wilder, was friends with and the influence for Ayn Rand's philosophy. Her sister Carrie was married to the man that named Mount Rushmore. Carrie's stepson was one of the carvers of Mount Rushmore. It was a wild read. Story 96. Yearbook archives. They have them online for most high schools in the U.S. I love picking a random state and trying to find a random town in the middle of nowhere and looking at their yearbook from like 1982. All these random people, and who knows what they're doing with their life now. Story 97. Esoteric rabbit holes. Now I'm enlightened. I just wanted to learn how to summon Satan, and now I'm meditating every day. Fudge waste of time. Story 98. Many people took a dig at the Illuminati. I did LOL, but never again. Want to worship and sell your soul to the devil? Then kudos to you. Story 99. Next door. What a toxic place. I left after 2 posts and got wacko, unnecessarily negative responses. One asking people to stop putting dog poop bags in my trash can, and another asking if anyone was missing a cat because there was a dead cat outside my house that morning. Answer, next door makes me fear for humanity. There was a guy in my community who was supposedly trying to raise money for a woman working at a local Kroger who was living in her van in the parking lot. Problem is that a good friend of mine was a manager at that store and knew the employee well. She wasn't homeless, and that wasn't even her van. And the guy collecting money and goods to give to her had never spoken to the manager in the store he said he was collaborating with. So I spoke up and started getting all sorts of dislike messages for being negative. Never mind that no one was checking this guy's story at all. People just refused to believe they were being scammed. No idea how far the guy's scam went because I left next door, but I do know the woman supposedly being helped never received anything at all. Story 100. I used to read a blog about childbirth and how dangerous home births can be. I'm not sure how I got there, as I'm vehemently child-free. One of the regular commenters eventually discussed having been in a cult in the past and pointed to her own blog. Assuming her story is mostly true, she was in a tiny cult folie, a deux trois quatre, in which the leader stated they were reincarnations of Lord of the Rings characters and of the actors from the movie. It went on, including trying to put on a convention which failed spectacularly, with said actors actually in attendance. Eventually, the original commenter managed to escape, and the leader spiraled for a bit. Then they started again in Harry Potter fandom, based on the dark fanfic Dumbledore's Army, which they might have written themselves. It's been years and details are fuzzy. Unfortunately, they seem to be having much more success with the second cult, with a lot of very young followers. And that's where I lost track of the story. Story 101. Started with celebrity memorials. Found myself several wiki articles deep into Lewy body dementia in comparison to other forms of the disease. Ended my night on a lighter note, learning about all the creative ways occupational therapists help those afflicted with dementia in order to improve their quality of life. Story 102. I ended up watching a mead brewing video on YouTube because they made a mead from Skyrim, and I was trying to decide whether the Skyrim cookbook was worthwhile. And then I ended up watching all of their videos. I am subscribed to their channel and always watch their new releases, and I feel like I could definitely brew a mead. I won't because I'm teetotal. Story 103. Shopping for dolls like American Girl, Bratz, and Barbie for my niece's birthday. But as I looked around, I discovered doll collecting like Dolphy, BJD, Voodoo, Reborn, ECT. Story 104. Various kinds of cakes and pies. There is a surprisingly huge font of information on Wikipedia about traditional baked goods from each region and country. Story 105. There's a community of very creepy mannequin collectors on Flickr. Some of them restore the models for money, but others just keep dozens of plastic men and women around the house. They're posed on furniture and routinely change outfits. I suspect it's an alternative taste for some, a hobby for most. Story 106. Terrariums. I got into a deep rabbit hole. I don't like bugs, but I kind of like the idea of creating an ecosystem. Story 107. I once found a message board about prisons in the U.S. A lot of it was people just casually saying banal stuff like, about to do 5-7 years in X prison. Does anyone know what the pillows are like there? People were giving each other advice on which judges were tough, tips about not lending people money in prison, and showing off art they'd made in prison. People were giving pretty good advice to first times about not getting into fights, keeping your head down, showing respect, and so on. Then there was a specific board for wives and girlfriends of prisoners. That was fascinating. Some heartbreaking, my son has just been sentenced for 10 years. I may not live to see him again. Some more than you'd think. I've fallen in love with a guy on passing row. Some, my idiot boyfriend has only been out for 2 months and he just got arrested again. How much time do you reckon he'll do? As a pretty law-abiding person with a boring life, it was absolutely fascinating and eye-opening. I cannot personally fathom being a woman who would voluntarily have 3 kids with a guy who'd spent the entire relationship in and out of prison, but there were women accepting it with a pretty cheerful, oh well, probably just 16 months this time. Lots of quite supportive chat about visiting days, whether you could bring in food, good gift ideas, and so on. One thread about, do you believe your guy did the crime he was convicted of? And lots of women quite openly saying, yep, he absolutely stabbed on that guy, but I love him anyway. As well as a lot of women who believe their men had been framed, betrayed, hung out to dry by their dodgy friends. Not that many believed their men were incarcerated due to straight-up miscarriages of justice, which was interesting. The whole thing was a mix of the heartbreaking and the prosaic, and I spent days reading through pages of threads. Went on a brief binge of ex-prisoner YouTube channels as well. Story 108. Mine was the dancing pig of 1518 or dance epidemic. It happened between July 1518 and September 1518, where up to 400 people danced for weeks, and at least 14 of them died. It had my full attention for a few months, lol. Story 109. Late 2000s, someone sent me a link to a website where someone had a podcast about an alternative religion they were trying to develop. The podcast consisted of around 10 different episodes, each about an hour long. Each episode was narrated by someone professional, but the track was edited to make the narrator's voice seem extremely high-pitched. It was a whole thing where the creator basically wanted people to believe that humans were beings sent from Mars and that we had impure souls or whatever. I put the podcast on as background noise while working on something else, and I got through 2 to 3 episodes before I turned it off and completely forgot about it. I wish I remembered what it was. Both because the website itself was also filled with more in-depth versions of the ramblings from the podcast, but also because I've brought this up to friends and they think I'm nuts because I can't find it anymore. Story 110. Once I was looking for high-end audio amplifier on secondhand marketplace. 2 hours and 25 tabs later, I'm reading a 700 pages book about how to build one. Story 111. Years ago, when I was going through utter hopelessness, I stumbled upon videos of an old guy reviewing old vintage toys and games RC. They brought me immense comfort. Story 112. I personally was extorted by a moving company, and the rabbit hole of how often it happens and the fact there really isn't anything you can do about it is maddening. We ended up paying $32K after signing an estimate of $15K. They held our things in storage lockers for months while our children had to sleep on the floor of a rental. We had nothing except what we packed in suitcases. It was a 3,000-mile move, and the main foreman was arrested at our house for theft of a previous job and was still allowed back the next day. These companies just change names if they get really bad juju, and you think you're calling a reputable moving company, and then without telling you, they outsource and find a contracting company that doesn't gaff, and no one is held accountable. You're just passed on from person to person. I will never trust a mover again and have PTSD and debt from it. Story 113. Terry Davis and Temple OS. Terry was suffering from mental problems, and he created a divine operating system called Temple OS. Shoot wild. Story 114. In the early 2000s, somehow I stumbled upon the blog of a woman whose parachute didn't open when skydiving and how she somehow survived the fall. It was documenting her recovery. AMD went really in depth with her physio and stuff. Never was able to find it again. Wish I could to see how she's doing more than a decade later. Story 115. Once I watched a 30-minute video about why Canon ND sounds spooky at 3 in the morning. Don't know why that video stuck in my memory. I think it's because of how surreal it felt at the time. Story 116. Who is the world's largest glitter buyer? Microplastics are everywhere. They're in toothpaste, cosmetics, arts and crafts. It's insidious. It can get spooky when you know they are endocrine disruptors, and I bet Big Pharma is making bank on sick people. Story 117. Not sure if it's weird, but got hooked on Center Place, YT channel, which is a church, I think, but spends a lot of their time poking holes in a lot of religious doctrine. Main dude is a very good presenter and drops frequent Simpson Monty Python jokes, so bonus points for that. Story 118. So basically, I was on TikTok, and there was a funny vid on my Fipe of these girls on that slingshot carnival ride. You know, I thought it was really cute and funny. They were screaming and laughing and all that and seemed to be having a lot of fun. But then I looked at the comments and the amount of saves, and I was like, okay, something isn't right here. So I clicked on the account that posted it, and all of their videos were just young, probably teen, like 14, 17 girls on that ride. Mostly girls with larger breasts and more revealing clothing. I'm not slut-shaming them. Carnivals are usually open in the summertime, and it's obviously hot outside. And I kept scrolling through this account, looking at the comments, the amounts of saves, and it clicked with me. The entire account was based on some sort of strangely specific alternative tastes. I'm assuming that these people got off of watching these girls be afraid on these rides, the screaming and all that, and gravity doing what it does to breasts. I was so disturbed, I reported every single video I could and the account. So yeah, super freaking weird. I still think about that sometimes at random. Story 119. Well, it started when I learned about an old YouTube video where a guy tells his dad he's a brony. Then that somehow turned into looking up people turning spaceships into waifus. Then that turned into discovering new kinds of hentai. Then it only got weirder from there. Story 120. I have two. One is deeply researching about uncontacted people and takedown of people trying to contact them. You can find maps and islands, and it's just wild. Another was Peacher. Okay. Drove through there on Route 66 while driving to Texas and noticed huge piles of what looked like salt in an absolute ghost town in the middle of nowhere. Turns out it was declared as a natural disaster zone and everyone was supposed to evacuate. Some people stayed, but the big holdout was a doctor who eventually died at a somewhat young age. Story 121. It started with research on high-profile public servants dying in barely covered scenarios and ended with looking at how toothpaste is made. Story 122. Dude, when you don't have a chainsaw, you need a chainsaw. It's that simple. Edit. I thoroughly enjoy restoration videos on YouTube. It's super relaxing. Story 123. Smart Schoolboy 9 or Finding Lost Media for Hunger, a 2015 indie game which turned into Little Nightmares. Story 124. I recently went down the pink sauce lady rabbit hole. It's so messy, but also very entertaining. I also have sucked myself into videos where people are repairing busted up makeup palettes or restoring a rusty object to look brand new. I think these sort of videos are super satisfying. Story 125. I watched videos on this guy who had a smoking alternative tastes and would smoke in all types of weird ways. In his videos, you could see him aging in real time and his health deteriorating while people literally fetishize what he was doing. It was pretty dark, and he eventually passed away from the obvious harm he was doing to his body. Story 126. Champagne Watchout was a Golden Dun, Tennessee walking horse stallion who qualified for the national championship class at the Walking He Was Horse Celebration, huge horse show. He was shown flat-shod and natural gaited in a class where all the other horses wear stack, shod and shown in the big lick, a bastardized form of the natural gait that is only achieved through harmful behavior. The show tried several ways to deny the entry in marquee class. In the end, they had to let him show. Oh, also the family that owned and showed him was black, in a world of white Southern good old boys. The owners made a whole website back in the late 90s, I believe, with pictures and videos to document this. I don't remember how I got there, but I spent hours reading all about it. Story 127. How the clitoris works. It wasn't horny searching, I was just curious. This is why intimacy ed is important. Story 128. The whole plot of the Hostel movies. Apparently, the director was inspired about stuff they found on the dark web. While the movies are not true stories, there are places and sites you can go to do stuff like that. Really shows you how messed up the world is. Story 129. Vega Flash happened off the coast of South Africa, Sept. 22, 1979. Likely to be a test firing of the new nukes Africa sold Israel. Story 130. Chris Chan is the creator of a terrible webcomic called Sonichu and believes that the characters in CWCville exist. Chris is considered to be the ultimate lolcow. The house Wikipedia bans mentioning them and only cryptically mentions a webcomic creator on the Kiwi Farms page and is literally a top candidate as the most documented human. Chris used to frequent a card shop with their friend Megan. Another frequent customer took their picture and posted it online. Stories of this person's weirdness were told. Sonichu was discovered and Chris raged. The CWCki was created by trolls, and Chris made the terrible mistake of spamming it with embarrassing information. Megan rightfully ended the friendship when Chris posted a pornographic crayon drawing of her. The peak of the trolling happened from 2007 to 2010. Clyde Cash was a prominent troll who kept stealing sweethearts. There was a time when Chris thought that a small YouTuber, Liquid Chris, was genuinely trying to steal their identity life. Many trolls, sweethearts, and attempted saviors have entered the situation, then inevitably noped out. Their father, Robert Bob, died in 2011. Christopher's name was changed to Christian as a child after an animatronic bear misheard it, and Bob thought it was a sign from God. Christian became Christine after Bob's passing. Organized trolling purposely decreased afterwards. The craziest days are behind us, was the common opinion until the idea guys entered in 2016 to manipulate Chris into giving them money. They convinced Chris that they are a goddess who is in a polygamous marriage with Sonichu characters. In retaliation, people doxed the idea guys on Kiwi Farms. A status quo had developed in which people simultaneously dislike Chris and anyone who attempts to exploit them. In late July 2021, the worst happened. A call was leaked in which Chris admitted to forbidden topic against their mother, Barbara Barb. Chris developed a new delusion shortly after being arrested that they are literally Jesus Christ. In April 2023, Chris was released. It's baffling. Current events. Chris is in a bizarre business partnership with a group of young adults and is often spotted in public with a woman they befriended through jail letters. Story 131. Charlie Project site. It documents thousands of U.S. missing persons cases. You can spend hours going through one after the other and researching some further. The Voynich manuscript, confirmed to be a genuine tome from the early 1400s, but no one can figure out what the language or elaborate illustrations are supposed to be. Lots of theories. OSHA casualty and fatality reports are available by year on their website. Workplace accidents. Sad, but the patterns are interesting, and some spur further research. Story 132. I once met a dude online who told me he was into ovipositor play. I don't think I'm particularly naive or innocent, but I was totally unaware of the world that awaited me as I did my research. I learned about bad dragon, egg molds, plungers, even gelatin recipes. My email inbox gets a lot of interesting advertisements now. Story 133. Killer bees. One recommended video, and hours later I know how they got to the States, how to escape from a swarm, and how they eliminate you. Story 134. The theory that Hitler never died and ended up taking a submarine to Argentina. There's books about it, documentaries about it, podcasts, you name it. Story 135. I needed something to watch during the brief periods between uni classes, but not something I'd get invested in. Ended up with those oddly satisfying videos on Instagram, specifically vacuuming content, where they just record themselves vacuuming up a bunch of stuff on their floor spiles of dust, some array of things that makes a nice sound when vacuumed up, which is all well and fine. The only time I really thought about the lives of the people making the vids is when I saw some of them would be vacuuming the living room floor, and you could see a kid's legs dangling on the couch because these creators are usually moms. I just have to wonder what those kids' lives are like. Can you imagine sitting down to catch a Bluey premiere, but your mom decided today she needs to record loud jerk vacuuming in the living room, and you can't hear your show, you can't make noise, and you just gotta find some way to entertain yourself quietly while staying out of frame. I'd be so pissed if I were those kids, lol. Story 136. The Born Different channel on YouTube. It started with the girl who lives in a bowl, then I went through the whole gamut of Upside Down Man and Mermaid Girl and Boy Whose Skin Fell Off and Woman Has 180 Orgasms per hour and so forth. I was stuck on those types of videos for days. Story 137. Some old webpage I can't seem to find online anymore. I think it by Dave McGowan because he wrote a book about the same info. The website was rather expansive and had pretty in-depth info about a lot of people from Laurel Canyon in the 60s and 70s who had notable personal CIA connections through parents and similar family relationships. Stuff about the father of Jim Morrison from The Doors to David Crosby and Charles Manson. Seemed to suggest the hippie movement was a psyop of sorts co-opted by the government as a means of suppressing, then controlling the so-called subversion of the nuclear family unit, blah, blah, etc. I remember the page ultimately referencing some looming purportedly big bad entity called the Tavistock Institute. Always meant to finish looking through it all. And of course, now it's seemingly gone. Story 138. Beaver dam removal with a side order of culvert clearing, and for a special treat, I throw in brush pile burning. Not remotely interested in the outdoors, but here we are, obsessed. Story 139. Not weird, but spent a whole night laser focused one UFC fighter origins. This YouTuber Lionel makes documentary-style videos on the whole career of fighters. I'm a big UFC fan, but not that big. Story 140. Germans and Nazis that saved Jews and what he would too. Germans and Nazis who activity tried to eliminate Hitler. Georg Elsera, nobody came very close. Story 141. Chemtrails. No idea how I got there. Edit. Also Snowball Earth when glaciers covered the entire Earth, including equatorial zones some 750 to 650 million years ago. Story 142. Eisenhower signing a treaty with the aliens, including a video of Eisenhower I haven't been able to find since where the word harvest was used twice in regards to allowances made in favor of the aliens interacting with humans. Story 143. Literally any TikTok drama I've come across on the platform since I joined in 2019, especially the family vlogger teen mom rabbit hole. Story 144. I'm currently down several rabbit holes due to a Reddit question about weird rabbit holes people have fallen into. Not sure I have enough years left to investigate them all. Story 145. Budgies. Little birds that chitter talk, that channel angels, and are the basis of a religion. It's a deep dive. I listened to hours of budgies talking with subtitle translations typed by the believers. Crazy stuff. Search for Victor the Budgie and the Angel Scrolls. Story 146. Watching hoof trimming and care videos on YouTube. Love Hoof Doctor and Nate the Hoof Guy. I know nothing about cows, nor own any, or have anything to do with livestock. Just watching them trim hoof claws down and cleaning corium with antiseptic really scratches some part of my brain. Story 147. I don't know it's necessarily the weirdest, but the shifting community on TikTok. Apparently shifting is when you're able to open your mind and enter a new reality. They swear it's not daydreaming or lucid dreaming, but literal going into other realities. Everything you experience is 100 real, so if you eliminate someone, you're a real-life murderer. There was apparently some drama because one creator posted that they were able to date Draco Malfoy, and the community ripped on her for being a literal pedophile. Story 148. Watched Eastwood's Dollar Trilogy, went on to YouTube to find the gun he used because it looked cool. It started with videos of the Colt 45, the conversions, etc. Ended up watching maybe 100 videos on modern handguns and subbed to so many gun channels. Had no idea about anything gun-related before this. Story 149. Number stations. It started last year around October, November, with a "What's that strange noise" post in the subreddit of my city. Someone suggested number stations, which in hindsight sounds rather unplausible, lol. Anyways, I listened to the Lincolnshire Poacher records, watched countless YT videos, etc. And now I'm going to write my pre-scientific paper, something you could do in order to graduate from high school in Austria about it. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchus. See you soon.